Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the International Youth Conference Session 8 Inclusion of Marginalized Youth in Communities. My name is Kyra Eubanks, and I'm the Youth Representative for New Future Foundation to United Nations and a proud member of the United Nations Department of Global Communications Youth Representative Steering Committee. Unfortunately, today's children and youth 0 to 34 years old constitute 4.4 billion of the world's population, and yet they are still frequently excluded from participating at various levels of family, community, and institutional decision making processes that directly impact their lives and their futures. The case is far worse for marginalized youth and at risk youth. Youth and young professionals bring a fresh outlook and innovation to problem solving. Moreover, as inheritors of the planet as we know, we are well positioned to incubate and unleash solutions to the pressing global issues and challenges that exist. It is imperative, therefore, that our concerns and our voices be considered at all levels. I am so excited to share that our panelists bring diverse perspectives as they represent their respective regions of the world. From India to Morocco, our speakers today will share what their personal and professional expertise are to highlight regional solutions, best practices, as well as lessons learned that ensure meaningful youth participation and inclusion in all aspects of life. I am so excited to now start our moderated panel discussion where I will be able to share first the name of our panelists, their organization, and allow them to provide their dialogue on their expertise as to what they are doing to solve this issue. Our first panelist is Hajar Khamshi. Hajar is an activist and co-founder of Mediterranean Youth Climate Action. Hajar, you now have the floor.
Thank you so much, Cairo. I'm really happy to be among all the participants and to be your host, Cairo, today. So actually, I would like to give uh, um, a glance about the climate action led by African youth. So across Africa, young people are increasingly raising their voices and advocating for climate action. So these climate leaders bring an important lens to the global discourse. So, while climate discourse has tended to focus on the science and technical elements of climate change, there is a growing recognition that climate change profoundly impacts human society. So, as such, further insight is needed into how different individuals and groups relate to climate change, depending on their situation within power structures based on social and context specific categorizations. Of course, not everyone has the same luck to be heard. Young people play a vital role in developing these insights further, as the demographic entity most impacted by climate change, and the one set to manage a climatically changed future. Young people tend to start their climate activism in Africa at local level, focusing on the issues most relevant to their local context and situations. In addition, their activists tend to focus on issues more of social justice. The wave of youth-led climate action in Africa encompasses issues of social justice that range from electricity, access for all, water management, bridging the digital divide, employment, and livelihoods, to women and girls empowerment and food security, of course, which is the major challenge in the continent. In this way, young people are demonstrating the need for intersectional approaches to climate action that consider poverty, inequality, racism, decolonization, gender disparities, and building a foundation for a just transition to a more sustainable future for all. This makes their approaches more relevant to all citizens from the grassroots and up. There is growing feeling that securing environmentally sustainable developments while at the same time promoting just and sustainable economies and social development ought to receive more attention from the public and in government interventions. Africa's youth are making it clear that they are knowledgeable, passionate, and active. Their meaningful participation and inclusion in climate related policy making spaces and processes, however, it remained a major challenge. And this stems from multiple factors that we can discuss a little further in the QA stage, in the QA section, Cairo.
I
Thank
think
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hajar. That was fantastic. And I have to say that, out of all of the different countries that constitute the continent of Africa, I feel as though there's oftentimes a misconception in terms of some of the issues that one country or one region might be facing as it relates to a climate action is the same as another, which is not the case. I've had the pleasure of getting to go to Morocco and getting to visit Senegal and several other countries. And these issues are localized, and we have to make sure that we are addressing them according to the community. So I look forward to being able to learn a little bit more about that in the Q&A section. Our next speaker is Safin Matthew, Programs Director of 1 Billion Foundation, 1M1B, and member of the Civil Society Youth Representative Steering Committee for the United Nations Department of Global Communications. He's one of my fellow committee members, and I'm excited to be able to introduce him today. Safin, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Cairo. In fact, it's a pleasure being on this panel with the incredible co-panelists. At 1 million for 1 billion, our mission is to activate 1 million youth leaders who will impact 1 billion people for a sustainable planet. Um, and to be frank, I'm extremely passionate about working with young people, and that's why I'd love to be on this panel. Over the course of the last few years, I've had the privilege in contributing towards activating over 100,000 youth towards the SDGs through our programs at 1M1B. I believe that we need the collective efforts of young people across the globe to address the major challenges that our world is facing. All the 17 SDG goals, of course, are major challenges. At the same time, climate action, that's a huge one. We may be just moving out of a pandemic, but the climate crisis is a bigger pandemic we all need to address. And somewhere, I think in the last 2 years, it got pushed to the background a bit. We frankly need to nurture youth to become human centered leaders who care for the planet and the people first, over profits and numbers. And we need to mentor them to use the new age tools and resources and look at solving all these age old, centuries old problems with new mindsets, right? And when I say youth, I mean youth from all sections. We need to ensure that we include youth from marginalized communities and youth at risk in building a sustainable and better planet. Just to share, at 1M1B, we've been at the forefront of activating youth towards the SDGs through real on ground work and grassroots impact and engaging them towards climate action. We have different innovative programs which gamify the whole process of taking action in a reward based challenge format. And this is something, I believe all the viewers can look at, in different countries. How do we engage youth in a meaningful manner such that it's exciting for them to take action as well? I'm happy to share that we are in fact launching climate action clubs across India in schools to inspire youth to take action towards climate crisis. And we should, in fact, encourage youth right from schools to take action, because the youth period of, let's say, from the 14 years to about 35 years is a long period, and that's when you have all your energy and your enthusiasm to make impact. Our mission is to in fact activate 100,000 youth to take climate action this year. And one more point I just want to touch upon, which we'll discuss in our questions, is that uh, we need to ensure that the youth, especially from the underserved regions, are also prepared for all the jobs of the future that come up. And that's why, as part of the organization, also we are doing this, where we're helping youth to prepare for jobs of the future by gaining important skills of the future in new age technologies. We're talking about artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, and of course the conversation about the metaverse going on, right? And it's important that we make these opportunities available to youth from underserved communities, from the marginalized communities, and the hinterlands, which are often neglected. We are assisting youth at risk to find purpose and direction. I think youth have the power to change the world. We just need to ensure we include youth irrespective of their backgrounds towards this whole mission. Thank you so much. Great to be on this panel and discuss more.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Saifan. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge those in the comments. We're streaming live, and I'm seeing people talk and say greetings from Kurdistan, greetings from the Philippines. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And for those who do have questions, we're going to have a live Q&A with our incredible panelists. So if you have a question, please enter it in the chat so that way we can make sure that we acknowledge you. And I do absolutely agree with what you said, Safin, and I love this concept of 1 million for 1 billion because it's true that one person can impact so many more people than they think that they're capable of by using their voice and being able to advocate for the issues that they care the most about. I had the honor of getting to be a guest judge for a pitch, a contest for 1M1B in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, Safin. And it was really incredible getting to see some of the students share their passion and how they are raising funds and raising awareness and also making an impact in their communities. So you're doing amazing with Safin. Thank you so much for sharing. Next, we have Shorobe Mercado. She's our next speaker. Shorobe is the director of the International Youth Conference IYC5. Thank you so much for being able to put this together. The STEAM director for UNESCO Center for Peace and the founder of Sehalus. All right, Shorobe, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. I was specifically very excited for this panel as well. It's an honor for me personally as representative here in this panel for the Latin American community. As well, we have the indigenous people that live in a majority as marginalized youth nowadays here in the region. So having to speak like for the issues, the problematics, the reality that they live in is a true honor for me to give them a voice, right, to what they are living right now. So I just want to say and start by saying that indigenous people in the world are among the groups mostly and the most strongly impacted and the most vulnerable to continuous climate change, in a specific to this problematic, which, according to all the scientific studies that we already know, will be increasingly catastrophic. So for indigenous people in a specific, the land is their source of life. It's for them spiritually a gift from the creator that nurtures, sustains, and teaches. So for them, Mother Earth is the center of the universe, the heart of their culture, and their yin of the identity as a people. So the prevailing view of the Western world is that nature must be studied, must be dissected and mastered. But for the indigenous people, is not just as mere economic resource. It's their ancestral lands that are literally their source of life, and their different lifestyles that they develop and define in relation of the environment that surrounds them. So for the many indigenous community that live off the land, it is essential to be able to forecast the weather and determine when to plant, harvest, hunt, carry out all the practices that they do, the traditions throughout the seasons of the year. So because of climate change, it's causing abrupt changes, not that do not fit the old patterns and the traditions. So I'm going to cite Campesino Center for Comprehensive Consulting and Training from Mexico. It's one of the indigenous villages is Pueblo Viniza, and it talks about how the rainy seasons have varied. So for the elderly, is now difficult to forecast. So there are other examples. I can really talk about hours about how many examples I can cite for the several indigenous communities. But for another example, just for now, and for the panel from the Federation of Mayuna Native Communities of Peru, it explains that during the last decades, they have lived directly consequences of climate change. Rains and floods in their ancestral lands occur at different times and are not predictable. So this has directly impacted their traditional farming system, as well as they can now not know how to fish, work to fish and hunt, ultimately affecting their ability to feed their families. And these have them really concerned about what this all means for their future as a community. So it's about not also knowing the scientific, not having the scientific knowledge to how to adapt to these climate change consequences that directly affects their lands. So
Mhm.
I'm here just to speak a little bit more about how also it has affected their culture. It has force them and really obligate them to migrate for better opportunities for a better life in the cities. So this has left many traditions and the culture that has prevailed for generations behind of them. So this
Mhm.
is really bad for the traditions and for the cultural identity of their own communities. So
Mhm.
uh, indigenous exclusion exists, and this is why it is one of the most vulnerable groups in the world. They do not have a seat at the table. They do not have the opportunity to participate in the discussions.
Yes.
Um,
Excuse me,
in
Shirley, you are sharing some incredible information that I would love to be able to discuss and dissect further in the Q&A. Let me tell you, I was writing down notes as you spoke, and I believe that a huge misconception that I've heard people
Mhm.
have as it relates to climate action, for example, is they think, oh, the temperature has just gone up by 1 degree, or they think that that's not such a big deal, but they don't realize the repercussions that happen or result as a result of that. And you're sharing, for example, from the indigenous perspective, or from those indigenous communities' perspectives, which is that this is not just an economic source. This is not just a resource that is appreciated for the environment, but it's also a legacy that is being impacted. And so I would love for us to be able to discuss that further in just a moment. But I believe that we have two more panelists, and I cannot wait to hear what they have to say. Shirley, thank you so much. Now I would like to introduce Lina Surkova, who is the founder and executive director of the International Young Leaders Organization, or IYLO. Lina, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Kyron. Thank you everyone organizing this wonderful conference. And I'm so happy to be here because I know the DGC Youth Steering Committee since 2 years ago, New York's conference, and I was very much impressed how young people are contributing to the UN discussions and how they work. And basically, they were running all the conference for 3 days. So no one can tell me that young people do not have the experience and knowledge to lead. And I'm also taking notes about what all you are saying, and I just want to thank you for all your work that you're doing, because I know it's not easy at all. And advocating for something what is so important for young people and future generations is really difficult, and not many senior leaders know how difficult it is. So what WILO is doing, and the Young Leaders Council we established now last year, is that we are advocating very strongly that young people are included in decision-making processes in the UN system, meaning being part of the intergovernmental processes. We have COP conference, we have so many climate summits, so many food summits, so many UN conferences, but young people are not even being allowed to be in the room because they are not diplomats. So UN is still run by member states, and being very, very honest with you, we pay very much attention what member states, what heads of state governments are saying, but we are missing the action. And this is what we demand. And we are very happy that the Secretary General was listening to us and included the creation of the UN Youth Office and the UN Youth Council in the Our Common Agenda report. And even he said this is one of his priorities, to establish this UN Youth Office, which is the way forward, and it's a very important step forward because we are still missing in the UN system the so-called UN Youth Architecture, where young people have official platforms and their official processes in place, how every young person can be invited to the UN meetings, can be part of the consultation, can speak at the General Assembly. So we need to really open the UN for young people for real. And this is what we are demanding, and we will continue doing our work. So things will change hopefully soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I completely agree that there's like I work on the ground and I'm a liaison for different community boards, and I sit on different boards and task member relations and all of that stuff. Being able to be a liaison between the community and perhaps another sector. And one thing that I've learned on the ground while talking to people and teaching them, for example, about the Sustainable Development Goals is that they didn't know that there was actually a space for civil society. They thought it was just member states, it was just ambassadors. That's all they really see or all they really hear about when they think about the United Nations. And that is why I am so grateful to get to be a part of the Youth Representative Steering Committee, because I get to be that young voice representing my NGO and some of the interests that DGC, or the Department of Global Communications, has in terms of distributing this information and making sure that civil society representatives are being able to have a seat at the table and getting to share their voices. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing a little bit more about that from my perspective, because I'm huge on leadership development and whatnot. But last but certainly not least, I have to make sure that I have Suad Al-Hamadi speak. She is the IAAI GLOCHA NGO Youth Representative to the United Nations Department of Global Communications. So let me tell you, I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Just hearing a little preview of that before we started, I'm all ears, and I'm sure our audience is as well. All right, you may begin.
Thank you so much, Kyra, and thank you very much for our amazing panelists. I'm really inspired already, and I hope our audience are already inspired by the amazing initiatives that they're doing. Actually, the purpose for me to be on the panel here today is to introduce you of the work that GLOCHA is actually doing with regards to climate change, as well as my personal initiatives with that regard. And first of all, actually, the team of GLOCHA are currently in Dubai doing amazing initiatives with regards to climate action and managing a lot of conferences, especially for the MENA Region Week. But just to convey the message of the team, they strongly believe that knowledge is power, and therefore they believe that educating not only youth, but educate everybody is a priority to us. And in this era of climate action, where climate action is actually needed a lot, or maybe the most, we are all victims. But this does not mean we should not be doing anything about it. It's our time to take action. So GLOCHA actually approach in supporting youth and everyone through focusing on different initiatives. And for the sake of time, of course, I cannot go in depth, but I'll go briefly on some of the initiatives that GLOCHA is doing. First of all, most important initiative, or one of the most important pillars, is focusing on capacity building, how we can actually support the marginalized youth or marginalized people with regards to letting them be aware of the information and knowledge that they have to know about. And then with that regard, we actually give them power to improve themselves and empower themselves. Secondly, supporting youth in indigenous communities, giving them their voices, allowing them to go abroad and talk about their initiatives, their communities, their challenges, so that we could also listen to them. And maybe in the future, we'll be able to provide them with solutions that could improve the quality of their lives, as also providing them competition and mechanisms. So it's really important for GLOCHA to provide platforms for youth where they can actually share, for an example, their music, they can share their art, they can share their work, so that it will give them the opportunity to share their work with the international community. And one of the important initiatives that I would really love to highlight for whoever is listening to us and to our amazing panelists is the Digital Art for Climate initiative, where it allows youth to actually put their work in as an NFT. And at that, when they actually put it as an NFT on the platform, it will actually give them the opportunity to sell their artwork and also support themselves and their communities. And I do believe it's actually an amazing initiative. And last but not least, having global partnership and joint projects to allow youth to have those access to all those programs.
Thank you for sharing that. And I had to write down digital art for climate. Okay, we're going to have to talk about that. That's a personal question that I have. Although I have been, looking at the chat and I have several questions for individuals and as well as some comments. I saw that one comment by Jessica Lee was just featured, but hearing, seeing the words very fruitful conversation, discussion. They love the impassioned speech, Shirley, and so many other wonderful comments here. So with that being said, why don't we go ahead and transition right into the Q&A. So the first question that I have, in 1 second, I'm looking at, is for Hajar. What are the impacts of the COP26 outcomes on African communities?
Well, after the COP26, countries failed to agree on many outcomes, including the means of implementation, finance, technology, and capacity building, which could enable Africa's delivery of its commitments through their nationally determined contributions or NDCs. Hence, which would enable the continent's resilience. Even if the funds are available, the continent continues to face technical and bureaucratic hurdles in accessing climate finance through unfavorable multilateral system designed to sustain the dominance of the global economic power. By 2019, the world's poorest countries managed to access only 18% of the Green Climate Fund, while the middle income countries such as Mexico and India accessed 65% of the fund, most of which for mitigation. And the most profound loss for African people was the irreducible minimum demand for the recognition of the continent as a special needs and circumstances region, which was dropped at the agenda stage of COP26. The African countries were also disappointed at the decision to only have annual conference of parties dialogue to discuss the funding arrangements to prevent and minimize and manage the loss and damages for the vulnerable communities. This happened after US, EU, and civil society were manifesting and expressing their opposition to not dedicate enough fund for damages for loss and damage, as the possibility of reaching fair, equitable, ecologically just, and gender responsive outcomes reduces impacts compound to the COVID-19 outbreaks. It continues to weaken the economy, continues to weaken the communities. The African nations just have developed the self-help recovery initiatives to transform their economies and create jobs while building resilience to cope with the pandemic. But the GDP exposure in Africa, in African nations, vulnerability, it's getting to the extreme. So it is projected to pass from a need from a need to 895 billion in 2018 to 1.4 trillion in 2023. So it is time for Africa to redefine its future by returning hope and trust in the process to collectively confront the biggest human challenge of our time, which is climate change. So there is an African spirit in the future COP27, but let's hope for the best for it.
Yes. Yes, we absolutely will. Thank you so much for bringing awareness to this, Hajar. You're absolutely right. And I actually see a question right now in the chat from Hanli Du that says, I feel that sometimes youth cannot solve serious problems such as hunger in marginalized communities. How can youth do the most effective, or how can youth have the most effective effort?
Well, yes, thank you, Henry, for the question. This is very important because this is the most important challenge. So mainly for youth work activism or efforts to be effective, it needs to be done in a collective manner. Building individual activism is fine, it's okay, but really working in groups and constituting networks gives a lot of strength to the work and give it more visibility. And however, there is this comes to the challenge or the major one for youth, which is poverty. and it is worsening with the time because most of the households in Africa are dependent on agriculture, and any unfavorable occurrences in this sector directly translates as more poverty, which would mean limited resources to meet the basic needs. Also, compounding all these problems, this makes it worse. So, so we need to have more resources allocated to the youth empowerment initiative, both at national and international levels. So these differences in accessing to and use of resources and technology are serious challenge to the achievements of climate resilient development.
Thank you so much for
Um,
sharing
yeah.
that. And I want to ask now, Shurabe, Shurabe, would you be willing to answer this from your perspective as well? Because I want to tie in what you were just saying, Hajar, in terms of any little occurrences that change, that are impacted as a result of the climate changing. It then has a ripple effect for all of the other sectors, as you were sharing, and that ties in so well with Shurabe and what you were saying in terms of the ties ancestrally and indigenously as well. So please go ahead and answer that question for us.
Excuse me, Carol. I didn't hear well the last part of the question.
Oh, oh, no problem, no
Excuse me.
problem. What I wanted to share, so you shared just now, Hajar, from the African perspective, and I would like to now transition and ask Shorbe for her
Ah,
perspective as
okay.
well, and to
Okay,
see
thank
if
you.
there are other panelists who would also like to contribute to this fantastic
Okay, sure.
question that Henry
Okay,
asked.
thank you.
Yes, no problem at all.
So for the perspective, well, as you know, I was talking at the beginning about the indigenous people, and from this sector in specific, the problem in general, just to sum it up, is that there is the majority of the times a lack of recognition of indigenous people, their rights and their institutions. So consequently, consultation with indigenous people and their participation in decision making is very limited due to the absence of public mechanisms for that purpose, as the system is not really built towards that sector. Their exclusion from decision making processes is also compounded by the limited capacity of their own institutions, the organizations, the networks. The lack of consultation or participation is an underlying cause of the social, economical, and environmental vulnerabilities that the group sector has, as well as the discrimination and exploitation to which they are exposed within every decision, within every action. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that regarding this problematic that we have of the lack of participation and recognition, is that we mainly need the social protection, the sustainable business creation for them, so that we have this simultaneous view addressing poverty and environmental degradation, as well as we are targeting indigenous people so that they can support themselves economically, socially, etc., etc. Their recognition, obviously, this is really important. The recognition of their lives, their rights, the promotion of gender equality inside their communities, as well as there is this other problematic. And well, in general, good coordination and collaboration in all political areas and levels.
Thank you so much for that. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the comments in the chat that I see here. For example, Hajar, you have a comment from Dubem saying, "We are so proud of you. In Africa, you are indeed a great woman. My leader, keep it up." And you made valid points. Absolutely accurate. And also, Henry loved your answer as well. So we're just getting tons of comments. Thank you so much. Please continue those comments. Keep them coming. Keep the questions coming, as we really do want to hear from all of our speakers. Is there any other panelists who'd like to answer this question, or can we move forward with another question? Would anybody else like to answer that, or we can continue? Fantastic. Okay. All right. So, Safin, the question that we have here for you is, what are some of the challenges that marginalized youth in India and neighboring regions face, and how have you been helping them address these challenges?
Great, sure, Cairo. And I think when I talk about India, it pretty much sums up for many of these challenges might be across other countries as well. Um, in the global south, as we call it, of which I know India is also a part of, a number of issues exist, and youth have a lot of challenges to deal with relating to poverty, lack of opportunities, lack of quality education, and the like. At 1M1B, we are constantly trying to make equal opportunities available to marginalized youth at the villages and the rural areas. Now, I'd like to share a couple of examples, and this could be a great for other countries to and other regions to replicate as well, right? And this might be relevant to many regions across the globe, and I hope I'm able to inspire some of the people to take more such actions, right? So many of our initiatives are aimed at helping youth at risk. When I say at risk, these are youth at the risk of dropout from school, youth at the risk of going down the wrong path. While the government is trying to make free education available to everyone, the civil society organizations also need to come together to support. Education is great, but when you're from a community who do not have enough income to feed yourself or your family, the prospect of studying for years and finding a job after your graduation can seem like quite an uphill task. That's a lot of years of education to actually earn an income, right? So it is important to make skilling opportunities available so that there's scope for them finding jobs sooner. Students usually tend to drop out, especially in India, after the eighth grade from marginalized communities. So we need to try to make skilling opportunities in new age jobs and technologies to help them become employable in the jobs of the future. And when I say employable, I mean the formal economy, not the first entry level jobs that we're talking about, because as we know, inflation's on the rise, the cost of living is increasing all across the world. um, Training students on the new age technologies which can actually make a difference. Everyone's talking about AI, using AI to build solutions for the community. That's something we should look at. And I have to say that you really cannot say that since they're from marginalized communities, they are any lesser. The ideas and work done by these youngsters in some of the programs that we conduct is incredible, and it's all about making these opportunities available to them. And an interesting thing that we're doing is we are actually leveraging the power of virtual reality and all the metaverse talk, and actually setting up virtual reality skilling hubs in a number of villages across India, where the youth can learn skills like painting, welding, fire safety, or work related to automobile in a hands-on manner virtually. And the best part is that virtual reality as such provides almost a real like experience, and this can actually be tested once if they're really interested in continuing in a real world environment. So when we talk about all the cool new age stuff related to the metaverse, that's fantastic, the whole world is talking about it. But it's important to explore how can the new world of metaverse help pull out those in need, right? So skilling and education have huge potential in the metaverse, and we're really excited how we can leverage this technology to help uh, at-risk youth get decent jobs. And I think across the world we need to look at using technology as an enabler amongst marginalized youth.
I couldn't agree more. I really could not. And I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of, unfortunately, sometimes there are people who have had to have make that really hard choice between going to school or supporting their families. And it really breaks my heart. And I'm so grateful that after I graduated college, I actually had the chance to live in South India and Tamil Nadu specifically for 6 months, where I was working with youth who were able to receive scholarships and support to actually finish school and to be the first of their families to actually graduate high school and to start work, and then to then build their families up and bring their families with them as they succeed. So I definitely understand where you're coming from, and I support that completely. I see some questions in the comments. There's one question here that I'd like to address to everyone, but Safin, if you'd like to take a stab at it and give us your response at first, that'd be fantastic. I see from Leonard. As a student leader here in my school, face-to-face gatherings are limited and a lot of our events and projects are online. What can I do to reach out to those students in marginalized communities? It's a fantastic questions. And then it ends,
Great
greetings
question.
from the Philippines.
Great question. In fact, very relevant in today's age, because when things were completely offline, it was different. Online, made us think differently. But to be very frank, even if you're in a virtual environment, a lot of things can be done. Working with youth in the last 2 years, uh, we were at a position where thinking, some of our programs we might just end them, because how are we going to create impact virtually? But the impact they've created, they've raised a lot of funds. They've created, impacted almost like 50,000 people, these young students we work with, right? So one of the ways you can look at is social media, YouTube, WhatsApp. Literally, I mean, in India at least, and in these countries across Asia, WhatsApp is very popular. It might be some other platform in other countries. Look at utilizing these, right? So you could, in today's age of creators, you could simply create a simple video, or we at the DGC, we are coming up with the youth interview series, which is another great platform that we have. We're interviewing youth, and Cairo, you have been leading that, an excellent initiative, where we're interviewing different youth across the world and showcasing what are things that could be done by others, inspire others. So look at using, podcasts, could be social media, could be the different digital tools to reach out to marginalized youth. And many of us may think that, youth from these regions do not have access to device, etc., but it's not very hard. In some form or the other, they do have access, right? Of course, a poverty and lack of resources is one thing, but there's always a way. It's all about finding out in that community what really works and trying to reach out through that. And let's leverage the digital world, because we're all in the digital world, but at the same time, we need to look at how can we utilize it for the betterment of those in real need.
Absolutely. And before I turn it over to the panel, I just want to say that, in terms of the misconception that maybe there's not access to these devices, it's true that that might be a misconception. Maybe there's someone who has a device in the house. Maybe it's a phone, maybe it's a computer, and there's access. And I just wanted to just shout out to my NGO, New Future Foundation, specifically the Jamaican chapter, because during the pandemic, we realized that there was a disparity of access to technology, and some of the kids were at risk in Kingston, Jamaica specifically, of dropping out of high school because they did not have access to a tablet at home. And so I'm very grateful that we were able to provide tablets to students in Kingston, Jamaica, and they actually sent messages to us letting us know that they were able to still complete that year of school. So it's true that there are ways in which we can still stay connected even during the pandemic. Now, I'd like to open it up to the rest of the panel. Are there any other people who would like to answer that question in terms of what can we do to reach out to students in marginalized communities, even with face-to-face gatherings being limited? I had a feeling, Shirabeh, that you would want to answer that, so please go ahead and take the floor.
Yes, actually, I have a project here in Mexico. Well, not here in Mexico, but where I live. We are just starting up. It's about having this education program for people, for students studying middle school in marginalized communities. So basically, what we are talking about is having them develop these abilities, like really essential skills for every person. I mean, of collaboration, emotional intelligence, communication, etc., etc. So as you were saying, one of the main challenges is how we get to them, how we get to this population in a specific, how can we get to this vulnerable group. What we are doing right now, and what we caught up with the COVID pandemic, is that these students were not able to go to the schools, and in their homes, as some of us were doing in Zoom platforms, we were in other virtual platforms. They couldn't, because they didn't have computers, they didn't have internet connections. So what we are trying to do is having a mobile application, a mobile app, so that they like play while they develop these skills, and they learn at the same time. So basically, it's about reaching them through their phones, through the phones of their parents, whenever they can, whenever they are possible, without an internet connection, and having these specific strategic relations with the schools, with the parents, with the teachers, with all the community that involves these students in marginalized communities and marginalized groups, so that they can download the app, they can get to the learning, they can get to the program, and they can have their skills with their activities, reflections, all done and packed up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that question. Is there anyone else who would like to answer the question of how to provide access to Indigenous communities, or how to get access during the pandemic or in limited spaces? Anyone else? Well, you know what, Sherbet? I actually think that's a great segue because the next question is actually directed towards you. So I'd love for you to give a response, brief response if possible, as to how is gender involved with the topic of vulnerable Indigenous communities and their inclusion?
Gender is a very important thing to tackle, really, and I'm really glad that this is on the discussion, because in a specific for marginalized group, in case of indigenous women, in a specific women that are in poverty and in vulnerable groups, they face diverse and successive forms of historical discrimination that combine and overlap, exposing them to human rights violations in all aspects of their daily lives, from the civil and political rights to the rights to access justice, to the economical, to the social and cultural rights, and the right to live free from violence. In specific, it's gender violence that it is really important to keep in mind and have this perspective on the vulnerable communities, and do not leave it floating there and just put it all together, as we know that gender inequality reduces the physical and economic mobility that these women could have, but also the women's representation and the opportunities in many places, making them even more vulnerable to growing environmental stresses and multi-hazard climate events in this case, especially among women poorest, among the subaltern, among those who do not have the representations in the domains of public policy. So just imagine that indigenous and marginalized and vulnerable communities do not have the representation. Just imagine those groups being woman part of a woman represented groups. They have these extra barrier for them.
Absolutely. Yes, no, you're absolutely right. And I wanted to share that the United Nations Department of Global Communications actually had an event on Thursday, on March 24th, called Equal Work, Equal Pay, where we talked a little bit more, about that in terms of the unpaid care work. And so I was honored to have gotten to moderate that on Thursday. But there was a calculator where we're able to, and I wish I could be able to share directly into the chat. I'm not sure if I can, but if you look up UN Women Unpaid Care Work calculator, it's like an interactive quiz basically that is able to determine how many years of unpaid work women often do versus men. And I can only imagine, for example, if there's if there's limited advocacy going on towards some of these Indigenous women who are experiencing some of these issues, I can see the direct correlation between mobility, and access as a result of that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Next, I'd actually like to, give a question specifically to Lena. And I want to know this question too. I actually see this and I want to know the answer. What barriers do young people currently face in engaging and shaping decisions within the United Nations system?
Thank you, Kyra. Well, it's a very interesting question. As we said before, like the access to meetings, access to be part of, to have a seat at the table. Like, we're speaking all the time that young people do not have a seat at the table. So how we can create this, what do we need? Do we need to bring the table? I don't know, but we really need to be mindful in creating these spaces for young people so they can be included in member state discussion, in the Secretary General Management Board discussions. One of the proposals we're advocating for is that the position of the youth envoy will be a position of a special envoy, which would mean that this person will be part of the management board as on an ISG and the Secretary General level, to be included in these decisions about the UN system in the annual meetings, management of the UN is having, and so on. And in order to shape the work, the work of the UN, but also you have another side, it's member states. And we know we have UN Youth Delegates program, which is, it's working, but there is lots of more things to improve. For example, we are also advocating not just for the creation of UN Youth Council as an advisory council to Security Council, GA, and also to other commissions. UN commissions and so on, and also UN offices, but also to create the UN Youth Assembly as an official platform where young people will work daily on the same agenda as member states are working and providing their own ideas, expertise, and language they want to see being reflected in the resolution, the outcome of the work of the member states, based on which is then then Secretariat taking action. So there are many ways how these things can be improved, can be established, but of course it takes will of the UN management, it takes the will of the member states to do so, and many times you will hear it takes the funding, so where the funding should come from. And many times member states or even UN agencies are talking about financing these youth programs or youth positions, but in the end, what is there for real? Where is the funding, so to say? I'm asking. So no one knows. And also the UN Youth Delegates program, there's supposed to be a fund, even to increase the participation of young people in this program, but no one knows what's happening. So, these are the questions that we need to ask in order to improve the situation. And also the another question that we need to ask, who should represent young people? Who have the right to speak on behalf of young people? And we realized also during the Our Common Agenda Young Thinkers track that we were invited by the SG office, we need to create this UN Youth Council to have these global youth representations, having everyone being included, to have a consultations processes, to have a processes in place in order to say this is the statement that the global youth want to deliver, right? So these structures needs to be created, and please join us, help us, and it's everyone can contribute, everyone can be part of. It's nothing that YLO is only doing. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. No, thank you so much. And it's so important that we have even venues and spaces like this to be able to talk about what our organizations are doing and contributing and saying, you know what, if you want to be able to join our initiative, if you see our cause and you appeal to our mission and vision, please join us. So I am a huge fan of IYLO. I have always been, and I thank you so much for sharing what your organization is doing. And last but certainly not least, because I have to say, I've been getting comments that I've been seeing saying that this is such a brilliant session and they want to actually be a part of the next discussion in the future. So we are having a fantastic time. And I can't believe that we're getting this close to ending. But I cannot end without asking this question specifically for Salah, which is, how is the IAAI GLOCHA NGO contributing to reducing the inequalities that exist for youth and communities, paying attention specifically to contributing to climate action? If you could please answer that for us.
Thank you very much, Kyra. And I believe that I actually answered this question at the starting of this panel when I mentioned some of the initiatives that IAAI is doing with regards to involving and opening new channels for youth to get involved in. And I do believe most of the youth in the panel today, especially Lena, has emphasized with her comments, with I believe those ideas are amazing and we need them in place. And one of the newest opportunities that I would really love to highlight on is the digital art for climate, where I believe that it will open a lot of opportunities for youth in different areas around the world, where it will also give them an opportunity to actually sell their work, which we believe is an amazing chance that we do not only empower them like through talks or events, but we empower them to make profits and to take care of themselves and their communities. And one last thing I wanted to add is previously I couldn't add is that I have created an initiative myself, and it's called the Bridge of Hope, which is fully supporting orphans. And because it's something that's very close to my heart, and part of it, we actually educated them about important pillars and information they have to know about, such as what Kyra have mentioned, the SDGs, and then climate action and other initiatives. And I do believe, like, my message to youth who are watching us, if you don't mind, Cairo, is that don't be scared to make decisions. Don't be scared to make initiatives. It's actually not that difficult. If you have the motivation, if you have the passion for it, you'll be able to do it. Don't be afraid to become successful. Just do it, and hopefully you'll become successful and help a lot of people out there.
And as the mission of 1 million, 1 billion says, it just takes one person. It takes 1 million as a whole to be able to impact then so many times that amount. So with that being said, I just want to thank all of our incredible panelists for being a part of today's discussion. It was truly enlightening, truly eye-opening. And I have to say that, some of the key takeaways that I saw, in this conversation from people, bringing up and connecting it to their own home countries or their regions as well. That was the whole point of us having this regional conversation. So thank you all for your expertise. I just wanted to share, Safin had alluded to the youth interview series, Storytelling with a Purpose. Thank you so much for doing that little plug. And I just wanted to share a little bit more about Storytelling with a Purpose before we close in just about 2 minutes. Storytelling with a Purpose is a civil society, youth-led, and youth-focused interview series created with the aim of sharing how civil society is taking action to create a sustainable future as a way to inspire others and benefit our world. So for example, today's conference panel, if you asked me, it would be Sustainable Development Goal number 10, reducing inequalities. So these are interview series episodes, and I am so excited to share that you will get to listen to the first episode tomorrow during the conference. And that episode, I was so honored to have gotten to interview Miss Aya Shebi, the former African Union and Youth Envoy. And she got to share, for example, some of the challenges that she faced, entering into this space, but also all of the amazing solutions and amazing ways in which we're able to have intergenerational conversation and dialogue to actually create action. Because as was shared just now, it's not just about having nice plans or being able to speak, but then what can we do in terms of taking action in order to change circumstance or status. So with that being said, that will actually be live streamed tomorrow. So please listen to it. Let me know what you think. Please share, for example, with the Department of Global Communications, how you enjoyed this episode, because we really created it from the heart. We want to make sure that your voices are being heard. And then after that episode and after these episodes that are recorded, we will invite individuals like yourselves to be able to contribute your stories as to what you're doing. And last but not least, I wanted to share that on March 25th, we celebrated the International Day of Remembrance of the victims of the slavery and transatlantic slave trade. So as you may know, this is observed globally. And it was designated on 2007, honoring the lives of the 10 to 20 million people, African, who were enslaved and now displaced throughout the world. And so I just wanted to thank the UN specifically for being able to commemorate my ancestors in this way. And just thank you so much. So with that being said, the next panel for IYC 5 is the African Regional Dialogue on Climate Actions that's starting at 12 p.m. EST. We hope to see you there. Thank you everyone for watching and joining us in, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.